He married a widow to protect her land. But fate had a different plan. The town of Willow Creek was small, quiet, and surrounded by wide open land that stretched farther than the eye could see. The wind moved gently through the dry grass, carrying dust along the empty roads. Life there was simple, but it was not always easy. Eleanor Hayes stood alone on the porch of her ranch house, looking out at the land that had once felt full of life. Now it felt too quiet, too empty. It had only been a few months since her husband passed away. Since then, everything had changed. The ranch needed work, the animals needed care, and most of all, the land needed protection. Eleanor was strong. Everyone in town knew that. She had helped run the ranch for years, but things were different now. Without her husband, people started to look at her differently. Some saw her as alone, some saw her as weak, and some saw her land as an opportunity. Letters had started to arrive, offers to buy the land. Some sounded kind, but others felt like pressure, like they were waiting for her to give up. But Eleanor had no plan to leave. This land was her home. One afternoon, she rode into town to collect supplies. The streets were calm, but she could feel the quiet whispers as she passed by. People were talking. They always were. She stepped into the general store and picked up what she needed. As she turned to leave, she noticed a man standing near the door. Daniel Carter. He was known in Willow Creek, but not in the way others were. He didn't talk much. He kept to himself, but everyone respected him. He worked hard, never caused trouble, and always kept his word. Eleanor had spoken to him only a few times before. Simple conversations, nothing more. "Miss Hayes," Daniel said softly, giving a small nod. "Mr. Carter," she replied. For a moment there was silence. Then Daniel spoke again. "I heard about the letters." Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "People talk too much in this town." "They do," he said, "but sometimes they're not wrong." She crossed her arms slightly. "I'm not selling my land." "I didn't think you would," Daniel replied calmly. There was something steady in his voice, something that made Eleanor pause. "Then why bring it up?" she asked. Daniel took a small breath before speaking again. "Because I know how this town works, and I know how people think. A woman alone, they'll keep pushing." Eleanor didn't like hearing that, even if it was true. "I can handle it," she said firmly. Daniel looked at her, not with doubt, but with understanding. "I believe you can," he said, "but that doesn't mean they'll stop." There was another pause. The air between them felt heavier now. Then Daniel said something unexpected. "Marry me." Eleanor blinked, sure she had heard wrong. "What?" "It wouldn't be real," he added quickly. "Not in the way people think. Just on paper." Eleanor stared at him, confused. "Why would you suggest that?" Daniel spoke simply, like he had already thought it through. "My name would give you protection. People would think twice before trying anything. They'd see the ranch isn't unguarded." Eleanor looked away for a moment, trying to understand what he was saying. A marriage? Just for protection? It sounded strange. It sounded risky, but it also made sense in a way she couldn't ignore. "And after?" she asked quietly. "When things settle," Daniel said, "we go our separate ways." His voice was calm, no pressure, no expectation, just an offer. Eleanor's mind raced. She had always been independent. She had never needed help like this before. But the truth was, things were not the same anymore. She thought about the letters, the whispers, the feeling that everything she had could slowly slip away. Then she looked back at Daniel. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because it's the right thing to do." There was honesty in his words, no hidden meaning, no personal gain, just a simple reason. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was not what she had imagined for her future, but maybe it was what she needed. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right," she said, "we'll do it." Daniel gave a small nod in return. "All right." The wedding happened just a few days later. It was small, quiet. Only a few people attended. There was no celebration, no music, no grand moment. But there was something else, a feeling that something important had just begun. As Eleanor stood beside Daniel, she couldn't help but feel uncertain about what lay ahead. This was supposed to be temporary, just an arrangement, nothing more. But as they left the town together and rode back toward the ranch, the wind moving softly around them, something inside her felt different. She didn't know why, and she didn't question it. Not yet. The first few days after the wedding felt strange. Eleanor woke up each morning and had to remind herself that she was no longer alone on the ranch. Daniel was there now, not as a guest, but as her husband. at least in name. Still, nothing between them felt like a real marriage. They spoke politely, they shared meals in silence. They kept a respectful distance, as if both were careful not to cross a line that had never been clearly drawn. But the ranch did not wait for emotions to settle. Work had to be done. Daniel started early every day. Before the sun fully rose, he was already outside, checking fences, fixing broken gates, and walking across the land like he had always belonged there. Eleanor noticed it quietly. At first, she didn't say much. She watched from a distance as he worked with patience and care. He didn't rush. He didn't complain. He simply did what needed to be done. One afternoon, she found him repairing an old fence near the far end of the property. "You don't have to do all this," she said. Daniel looked up, wiping his hands. "It needs to be done." "I've managed before," Eleanor replied. He nodded. "I know, but now you don't have to do it alone." Those words stayed with her longer than she expected. Slowly, things began to change. Eleanor started working alongside him. At first it was just small tasks, then longer hours. They began to talk more about the land, the animals, and the small details of daily life. Their conversations were simple, but they felt real. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch as the sun began to set. The sky turned soft shades of orange and gold. "It looks better," Daniel said, looking out at the land. Eleanor followed his gaze. The ranch did look different. Cleaner, stronger, more alive. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Days turned into weeks. The town of Willow Creek began to notice the change too. When Eleanor visited the market, people spoke to her differently. There was less pity in their eyes, more respect. Daniel's presence had done exactly what he said it would, but something else was happening too. It was not just the land that was changing. One morning, Eleanor brought coffee outside and handed a cup to Daniel. "Thank you," he said. She gave a small smile. "You've been working since sunrise. Thought you might need it." He looked slightly surprised but accepted it. It was a small moment, but it meant something. Later that day, they worked together to move supplies into the barn. At one point, they both reached for the same box at the same time. Their hands brushed slightly. Both paused. Eleanor quickly stepped back. "Sorry." "It's fine," Daniel said calmly. But the moment stayed with both of them. There was something different in the air now, something unspoken. That evening, they shared dinner inside instead of on the porch. The conversation lasted longer than usual. Eleanor found herself asking questions she had never thought to ask before. "Why did you stay in Willow Creek?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "It's quiet. Simple. That's all?" she said with a small smile. He looked at her. "Sometimes that's enough." Eleanor nodded. She understood that more than she expected. For a while, everything felt steady, until the letter arrived. It came in the afternoon, delivered by a young boy from town. Eleanor opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel stood nearby. As she read, her expression slowly changed. "What is it?" Daniel asked. Eleanor handed him the paper. It was an official notice. It questioned the ownership of the land. It suggested that there were records and agreements from the past that might affect her claim. Daniel read it carefully, his face serious. "They're not giving up," he said. Eleanor shook her head. I thought things were getting better." "They are," Daniel said. "But this isn't about the present. It's about the past." Eleanor sat down slowly. The peace she had started to feel now seemed uncertain. "What if I lose everything?" she whispered. Daniel placed the letter on the table. "You won't," he said firmly. She looked at him. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "But I can promise I won't walk away." There was something strong in his voice, something steady and certain. Eleanor felt it. For a moment, the fear inside her eased. But questions still remained. The past had returned, and it was not going to be easy to face. That night, Eleanor stood alone outside, looking at the land under the quiet sky. The wind moved softly across the fields. This place meant everything to her, and now, once again, it was at risk. Behind her, the door opened. Daniel stepped out onto the porch but didn't say anything. He simply stood there, not too close, not too far. And somehow, that was enough. The letter changed everything. The calm life Eleanor had started to feel slipped away again. The ranch was still standing strong, the fences repaired, the land cared for. But now there was a question hanging over it all. Did it truly belong to her? The next morning, Daniel left early for town. He wanted answers. The letter mentioned old records, and he knew someone at the town office who could help. Eleanor stayed behind. She tried to focus on her work, feeding the animals and cleaning the barn, but her mind was not at peace. Every small task felt heavier than before. By afternoon, she couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. She went inside the house and walked into the storage room, a place she had not entered since her husband passed away. Dust covered old boxes, and the air felt still, like time had stopped there. Eleanor hesitated at the door. Then she stepped inside. She began opening boxes slowly, looking for anything that might explain the letter. Old papers, receipts, small notes, nothing seemed important at first, until she found a worn leather journal. Her hands paused as she picked it up. It belonged to her late husband. For a moment, she thought about putting it back. Some memories were easier left untouched, but this was different now. She opened it. At first, the pages were filled with simple notes about the ranch, weather, crops, repairs. But as she kept reading, the tone began to change. There were entries about money problems, about difficult seasons, about offers from buyers. Eleanor's heart sank. Then she found something that made her stop completely. Her husband had once considered selling the land, not just once, but several times. Eleanor sat down slowly, the journal resting in her lap. Her mind struggled to accept what she was reading. He had never told her. She always believed they were building something strong together, something permanent, but now it seemed uncertain. The land she had been fighting to protect might not have been as secure as she thought. The truth felt heavy and confusing. By the time Daniel returned that evening, the sun was already low in the sky. He found Eleanor sitting on the porch, the journal beside her. "I spoke to the town office," he said as he approached. "There are records, but they're unclear. Some agreements were never fully completed." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I think I found something too." She handed him the journal. Daniel read a few pages, his expression quiet and focused. After a moment, he closed it gently. "This doesn't change what the land is now," he said. "But it changes what it was," Eleanor replied softly. There was a long silence between them. Eleanor looked out at the land. "I thought I understood everything about this place, about my life here." Daniel sat down beside her, leaving a small space between them. "Sometimes we don't know the full story," he said, "not until later." Eleanor let out a quiet breath. "It feels like everything is uncertain again." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the land, just as she was doing. "It may be uncertain," he said finally, "but it's still yours to stand for." Eleanor turned to him. "And what about you?" He met her eyes. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then spoke honestly. Us. It was supposed to be temporary. Just an arrangement." She paused. "But things don't feel that simple anymore." Daniel didn't look away. "They're not," he admitted. The truth hung between them now. Clear. Unavoidable. Eleanor's voice softened. "When this is over, when everything is settled, what happens then?" It was the question both of them had been avoiding. Daniel didn't have an easy answer. He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "I don't know," he said honestly. Eleanor nodded, even though his answer left her unsettled. That night, the air felt different. Not tense, but deeper. More real. Inside the house, everything was quiet, but neither of them could ignore what had changed. The truth about the past had come to light, and with it, their own feelings had become harder to hide. The next few days passed slowly. They continued working together, but something had shifted. Their conversations were softer, more thoughtful. There was more meaning in the small moments. One evening, as they finished their work, Eleanor looked at Daniel and said, "I'm glad you're here." Daniel paused slightly, then nodded. "So am I." It was simple, but it meant everything. Still, the problem remained. The land was not fully secure yet. The past still had a hold on it. And now, their future felt just as uncertain. Eleanor stood again on the porch later that night, looking out at the wide land under the stars. This place had always been her home, but now it was also something more. A place tied to change, to truth, and to a connection she never expected. Behind her, Daniel stepped outside once again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because both of them understood now. The final decision about the land was coming soon. Eleanor could feel it in the quiet way people spoke in town, in the careful looks they gave her, and in the way the days seemed to move both fast and slow at the same time. Nothing more could be hidden now. The past had been uncovered. The truth was no longer a mystery. But the future? was still waiting. Early one morning, Eleanor and Daniel rode into Willow Creek together. The sky was clear and the air felt calm, but inside, both of them carried silent thoughts. Today mattered. At the town office, a small group had already gathered. Some were there out of curiosity. Others had come because they believed in Eleanor and the work she had done. The officials reviewed the records once more. Papers were placed on the table. Old agreements were read carefully. Questions were asked. Eleanor stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She simply waited. Daniel stood beside her, steady as always. After some time, one of the officials looked up. "The past records are incomplete," he said. There were discussions about selling the land, but no final agreement was ever signed. Eleanor held her breath. The man continued. "That means the ownership was never transferred. The land remains legally yours." For a moment, everything felt still. Then Eleanor let out a soft breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It was over. The land was safe. A quiet wave of relief passed through the room. Some people nodded, others smiled. Daniel looked at Eleanor. There was no big reaction, no loud words, just a calm understanding. They had made it through. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer than before. Eleanor stepped onto the wooden porch of the office and looked out at the town. For the first time in a long while, she felt steady again. Daniel joined her a moment later. "It's done," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "It is." There was a short silence, but now a different question stood between them, the one they had both been avoiding. Eleanor turned to him. "The agreement. We said it was temporary." Daniel nodded. "We did." She looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Things changed," she said quietly. "At least, for me." Daniel didn't seem surprised. "They changed for me too," he admitted. Eleanor looked up at him. The wind moved gently through the street, carrying a quiet calm with it. "What do we do now?" she asked. Daniel took a moment before answering. "We decide," he said simply. Eleanor gave a small, thoughtful smile. "It's not as easy as that." "No," he said, "but it's honest." They stood there for a while, not rushing the moment, because this time there was no pressure, no fear, just truth. Later that day, they returned to the ranch together. The land looked stronger than ever. The fences stood firm, the fields stretched wide and open. It felt alive again. Eleanor stepped off her horse and looked around. "This place, it feels different," she said. Daniel nodded. "Because it is." She turned to him. "When you first came here," she said, "it was just a help." "That's right. And now?" Daniel met her eyes. "Now I'm here because I want to be." The words were simple, but they carried meaning that neither of them could ignore. Eleanor felt something settle inside her, something calm and certain. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. She was just standing in the present. And it felt right. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun slowly set over the land. The sky turned soft shades of gold and pink, just like it had many evenings before. But this time, it felt different, peaceful, real. "I used to think I had to do everything alone," Eleanor said quietly. Daniel looked out at the land. "You never had to." She smiled slightly. "Maybe, but I didn't see that before." "And now?" he asked. Eleanor glanced at him. "Now I do." There was no need for big promises or dramatic words. Everything that mattered had already been said. The journey had not been easy. There had been uncertainty, hidden truths, and difficult questions. But in the end, it had led them here, to something unexpected, to something real. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the land grew quiet under the evening sky. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair, feeling at peace. Beside her, Daniel sat just as calm. No longer strangers, no longer just part of an agreement, but something more. The wind moved gently across Willow Creek, just as it always had. But now it carried a different feeling. Not of loss, not of fear, but of a new beginning.